Hi, I'm Scott at ediblemusic.com. Reverb is one of the most important effects that you can use in order to get your mix to sound professional and large and emotive. But it can also be a bit of a danger because it can very quickly begin to cloud up your mix, covering up the program elements, and it can actually make things sound worse than they did before. I want to help you to avoid that potential trouble by showing you how to get some nice, clear, yet spacious reverbs by using Reverb Predelay. You might already be familiar that Reverb Predelay will put a little bit of a space between the program element and the reverb effect that it's sending to. So for example, a vocal with a reverb on it will have a little bit of time so that you can still hear the vocal track first, and then the reverb will sort of open up after the line has been sung, or after just the beginning of the line has been sung, or just the end of the line has been sung. That much is pretty straightforward, and I discussed this in a workshop that I was doing one-on-one last week. But it led us to the bigger problem, which is when should you use Reverb Predelay and how much should you actually set it for the particular song that you're working on? Those are the important questions, and it's why I really like to work in one-on-one sessions, because we can start with a problem, solve it, but then that shows us how to get a little bit deeper and actually get into some of the more advanced techniques that will really help to start to accelerate your mixing results. Now, imagine yourself in a gymnasium and you have a friend who's about 10 feet away and they shout your name. You're going to hear their name, or you're going to hear their voice pretty directly, and then you might hear some of the reverberant energy from the gymnasium. You know, like a gymnasium from your public school, one that you've been in, that's very echoey when it's empty, and especially when it's full. It can just be this very loud sort of mass of noise. But in this instance, it's just you and your friend. They say your name, and you'll hear them pretty directly, but if you remain in the same spot and your friend moves to the other end of the gymnasium, you'll hear all of the reverberation from the walls and the floor and the ceiling at pretty much the same time as their voice. So you'll get a lot more reverberant energy when they're further away than when they're closer to you. This very much mimics how you can utilize Reverb Predelay, because if you want something to sound further away, then you might not use a lot of pre-delay. And if you want something to sound much closer, then you would add some pre-delay in between the program element and the reverb effect. Again, though, the question is when to use it and how much to use it. Now, on this example, I've got 3 reverbs set up. On the right of the screen are the return channels. I've set up 3 groups to 3 different instances of the same reverb. The drums group, all of the drums, all of the guitars, and then all of the vocals. We'll start with them all with the same settings, but the reason why I've sent each of these elements or these groups to their own reverbs is because I'm going to show you how to make use of Reverb Predelay in order to position a program element within the space of the mix. And even as I brought it in here, you can already tell that it sounds a little bit further away, especially on the vocals here, if I bring it in and out. Now I'll leave it off the other groups. Let's set up a pre-delay on the drums. And we'll bring it up a little bit louder so that we can really tell what's going on with it. Pull it down a bit again. That's a bit better, right? 5.2 milliseconds is not a lot, but it's just enough time to allow the transient on the snare and the hi-hats and the cymbals to push out, and then to allow the reverb to come up and fill up the space after the drum hits, but not during the drum hits. Now, if we were to set all of them to 5.2, it does sound a little bit better than without any pre-delay at all. However, now it just sounds as though that masking that occurs is happening in the middle ground of the mix rather than in the foreground of the mix as it was. So this is why it's useful to set up different pre-delays depending upon where you want to position a program element in the mix. So I think we're good with our drums if they're at the back of the mix with a shorter pre-delay on it, because remember that example of you standing in the gymnasium. If the drums are further back in the room, closer to the wall, to the surfaces of the playing area, of the performance space, then you'll hear more of that reverberant energy than you would if the drums were sitting right in front of you. However, the guitars maybe ought to fit into the middle ground, and the vocals might want to be up front. So let's switch to the vocals then. We'll extend the pre-delay. And when you bring it down, just sort of tuck it back in. And now let's position the guitars somewhere in the middle between the drums and the vocals. Here's our mix without any of these reverbs. And I'll punch them back in again. Now, as important as reverb is, it depends upon the steps that you will have done before you get to it. You want to make sure that your EQ and your compression and your saturation are all in place in order to optimize the mix balance to get to the reverb and delay effects that you might be using to introduce a nice sense of space within the mix. In order to help you get to that point and to get your mix optimized, I want you to make use of the 5-day foundation series that I designed, which goes you through one stage at a time in order to get you to the point to implement reverb in a really nice, professional, and creative way. Get that at ediblemusic.com/5days. Now, I want to show you one more thing here. We sort of logically pushed the drums to the back of the room, the guitars to the middle, and the vocals to the front. But what happens if you were to reverse those? Say for example, if I made the vocal reverb only 5.2 and extended the drums, and maybe the guitar is even longer, that makes it start to sound a little bit weird, doesn't it? So think about it logically. Imagine the space of performance that the mix would be taking place in. And usually the case would be such that the drums would be more to the back. They're very loud, so they can project a lot more. And because they're more to the back of the performing space, then you would hear more of this actual space as well, the early reflections and the reverberation. So logically, I think a shorter pre-delay would make sense. And the guitars then can have the middle ground of the mix. And the vocals, because you want the vocals to be nice and clear and up front, then the reverb can occupy the space behind and in between the vocal phrases with a bit of a longer pre-delay. Almost like the example of your friend standing closer to you, you would hear their voice directly first, and then you would hear the early reflections just a little bit later. So it models the same way that a performance would be organized and distributed within an actual space. So make use of pre-delay in order to get your mixes nice and clear, but also to add some really nice sense of liveliness and connection between the program elements that you're mixing. Try it out.